Setting up now.
As soon as it shows up on.
Yeah, I think it will. That's when I'll share it on my sites. I wait for it to show up live, and it gives people a chance to come in.
As soon as it shows up on.
Yeah, I think it's showing up now.
It is. I just got it.
All right, so what I'll do now is I'm going to share it out to the groups while we get people coming in. So just bear with me for a second.
Sure.
And then we'll get started.
I'm sending it out to my mass text message list. I got 135 people on there, so I'm sending it right now.
Oh, wow. So we're going to have, hopefully we'll have a good turnaround. All right, guys, we do have people coming in. So guys, just bear with me. I'm going to share it out real quick like I always do. Okay, 12 is live now. All right, just bear with me, guys. I just got to share it on Facebook too.
I'm going to show you how to do this in the future, Anthony, where you can do this before you go live.
You can't though, right? Am I missing it?
Yeah, you're missing. I'll show you next time.
Oh, really? You can?
We're going to give you an RDAP Dan tip.
I need that RDAP Dan tip because I usually do it, but it also gives people a chance to come into the room. But if you know another way,
no, it brings them into the room live. But
really?
It lets you do it before, so you're not.
All right, so maybe later on you could tell me how to do that.
Yeah, I'll show you after if you want.
Is that through the Zoom app?
Yep. Well, it's Zoom and I'll show you. It's hard to explain.
Right, but it will be able to do it through all the different groups I send it to.
Yep.
As I send it to just a bunch of correctional officer groups. One more group left. Thanks for being patient, guys.
Everyone's asking where Russ is.
Oh, they're already doing that already? Hey, guys, Russ is actually driving back to Pennsylvania. He went to go see a relative. I believe it's his son in Virginia, I believe. So Russ won't be able to make it today, but he may, knowing Russ, he may be on this, he may participate live with us. Hey, D2H, hey, Stanley, how you doing? We already got questions coming in, but first, before we get to the questions, let's introduce my guest. All right, so guys, we all should be familiar with RDAP Dan. He does have a YouTube channel. He's a gentleman that I have a lot of respect for, and I'll tell you why shortly after RDAP Dan introduces himself. But Dan Wise, if I may, do you mind introducing yourself to my audience? Tell them a little bit about yourself.
Absolutely, and thanks a lot, Anthony, for having me on here today. So my name is Dan Wise. I am a federal prison consultant. I mostly work with first-time nonviolent offenders / white-collar individuals that are getting ready to possibly enter into the prison system for the first time, but more importantly, what they go through prior to going to prison. As many of you know that are possibly in corrections, when you get indicted or you get arrested initially, there can be months and months and months that go by before you actually take your plea and potentially start your prison sentence. So that process can be quite overwhelming for the average individual that's never really been in trouble before. So my job is to help them prepare and understand what's next, and that this likely will not be the end of the world, and how they can start taking accountability now to potentially reduce the sentence and get out of prison and stay out of prison.
Right, and I'll tell you something, guys. I've actually learned a lot from his channel. I pretty much watch every episode. I try to catch them live because you also go live. But if I do miss the live, I always obviously catch on the replay. A lot of good information for those that are just kind of trying to understand the other side of things, but also working in state, you have a lot of good information about the federal system, which I think is phenomenal. And a little bit about RDAP Dan. I'll tell you why. And thank you guys. I appreciate the compliments. You know, not too long ago, I got hit pretty hard by the prison channels. The reason being was one of the inmates, one of the former inmates, I'm sorry, who ran a channel, was telling people how to manipulate the system, how to get into protective custody, stuff like that. Now, of course, you know me being an advocate for the system, I don't want people learning how to manipulate that, because we need that system. That's the system that we utilize to protect individuals. So what happened was I got upset and I did a response, and that response made it back to the channels, and it really did get twisted in how they said I responded. It became very like it took like an aggressive tone, which it wasn't an aggressive tone. It was literally saying, hey, you know what, I don't want people manipulating the system, so I'm kind of countering what the other gentleman was saying. So with that said, I got slammed by their followers because these prison channels have over 300 to 400,000 followers, and they're active followers. So for the course of a few days, I got slammed with some very aggressive comments, threats, and everything. I wound up having to turn off comments for a while. And for you guys that have been with my channel for a while, this is you guys know this. You guys were there when I went through it. RDAP Dan was actually one of the individuals who, on his channel, he mentioned that obviously they're not watching Gangi's content. Gangi's content is pretty fair and objective. And even though we may look like we have two different sides of the coin, it's not. It's just two different perspectives that we're trying to work in the middle. Me and RDAP Dan, I'm just call you Dan. We know, because I got an email back from you a while ago, that we know there has to be middle ground because changes are happening in corrections. And the thing is that maybe I feel that our side's kind of being left out. So Dan's always saying, well, let's get that middle ground. Where is that middle ground? And it really is the balance between safety and security and rehabilitation, knowing that the mission is rehabilitation, but you can't do it without safety and security. So I thought part of our discussion today could be about that balance. But there's also a key thing. Dan, you served time in the federal system, correct?
Yes, I was sentenced to 42 months in the federal prison, Coleman Low, which is in Central Florida.
So let's talk about, I mean, if you want to talk about what got you there, that's on you, but I want to talk about your stay a little bit. So sure. Are you okay with telling people what got you there?
Oh, yeah. They have to go to my channel to find out. No,
whatever you want to do. Hey, guys, if you do get a chance, guys, I never steer you wrong. When we're done with here, I would like you to check out RDAP Dan's channel. I'm actually going to put a link in the comments right now. But I just want to hear a little bit of your story, Dan.
Sure. So most of my life, my young adult life, I spent a lot of time trying to find shortcuts to get things that I wanted, whether it be finances, happiness, whatever it is. I never really wanted to put in the hard work and the effort that was required. So in 2011, I took a job offer, which was office manager for a doctor's office or a pain clinic or a pill mill. There's a million names you can refer to them as. And I was the office manager there. And ultimately what happened was the doctor, of course, was overprescribing narcotics, Schedule II, whether oxycodone, Percocets. I turned a blind eye, justifying it in the moment, saying it's not my responsibility to maintain or micromanage what the doctor does. Whatever he does is on him. Well, when the federal government came in and raided the place, basically it was the DEA, drug enforcement came in, they raided, they determined that the doctor was writing prescriptions for non-legitimate purposes. And they felt that everybody that worked there was aware that this was going on, for the simple fact that the average patient was driving from Kentucky or Ohio, and this office we had was in Savannah, Georgia. So we had people driving all over different states coming in to see this doctor. They'd pull up in one car and 25, 30 people would get out of the car. Maybe not that many, but you get the point. And they'd go in and one person would pay. They'd go in, see the doctor, get their prescriptions. Then all these people would, the driver of the car that paid for all the prescriptions, he would take half of whatever prescriptions they had. This is another term for a sponsor. So individuals would sponsor these individuals, and this is how they'd get the drugs and put them back out on the street and sell them for, street market value. And I tried to justify it when the feds came in saying I knew what was going on. I said, I'm not the one writing the prescriptions. I have nothing to do with that. I'm just here to do a job. And that was the bullshit line that I told myself, because it was easier than admitting that I was part of the problem. It wasn't until I actually went into the prison system. I ended up fighting my case from 2011 till 2014, where I finally took a plea deal, and they capped my amount of time that they could give me at 60 months. So I took a 60-month plea, and then at sentencing, the judge downward departed to a 42-month sentence. And once I got into the prison system, I found out about a program called RDAP, Residential Drug Addiction Program, which is a 500-hour intense inpatient program that's a CBT, Cognitive Behavior Therapy program, which I thought I was going to be able to manipulate my way through this program, thinking maybe similar to like AA or NA, where you just kind of show up to these groups, sit there, listen a little bit, take a quick test, and you get a year off your sentence for graduating this class. So I thought I found a way to beat the system once again. But what I didn't account for was this program, even though it was a drug and alcohol program, it had way more to do about changing your thinking and focusing on consequences and holding each other accountable. And they saw right through all of my bullshit. Every con and scam I thought I was going to be able to pull on them, they had seen a million people before me try to do the same thing. So they immediately held me accountable every time, to the point where it became so uncomfortable that I thought about quitting the program and giving up the year that I was going to be given off of it. But then, of course, you think about your family, and, you know, I had children at the time, and it's like, well, it's not really fair to them. So maybe I need to change the way I'm thinking. Maybe I just need to try to give this program a chance and see if I can actually benefit anything from it. And when I actually gave in and kind of gave up and realized that I didn't have all the answers, and I wasn't the smartest person in the room, I realized that I had a lot to learn from everybody around me. And I started taking the program serious, and I started learning and focusing and exposing all of the flaws that I had that I never wanted to face before. And it was a 10-month intense program that I never want to do it again, just like I never want to go to prison again. But I'm also completely blessed and grateful that I had the opportunity to go through this, because if I hadn't gone through this, there's a good chance that I would probably either be back in prison or still finding shortcuts throughout life. So that's, I guess that's not the quick side of the story, but that's what you get right now.
Well, you know Bonnie. We all know Bonnie. Bonnie actually said, sounds like you walked into RDAP as a con, but walked out as a man.
Amen, Bonnie.
Yeah, you know Bonnie. We
Well
all know
said.
Bonnie. Hey, you know, I was talking to one of the gentlemen here on my site not too long ago. I had put up that we were doing the show. And it's great that you hit on the one point about people who think they're going to come in and manipulate that system when it's a lot harder, because he actually thought that you were trying to convince people to get into the RDAP program to save them time. And then once I explained it to him, he was very open to seeing that that's not what your motive is. So again, he put down, he goes, you know, usually what he thought was that RDAP Dan was trying to get people to take this drug program, and then in the end, they take off months off their time. But you said right at the beginning, if you're looking to manipulate this, it's not that easy.
You know, and something that I believe wholeheartedly, I apologize. It doesn't really matter what your intentions are. Almost everybody that goes into the federal prison system or any prison system that has a beneficial program that can cause or give sentence reduction by completing it, everybody initially is going to want to take that program to get the time off. I didn't want to take RDAP because I wanted to fix myself. I didn't want to take RDAP because I wanted to change who I was. I didn't take RDAP because I wanted to be a better father or husband. I wanted to take RDAP because I wanted to get a year off of my sentence. However, what changes is you realize that the only way that's going to actually happen is if you start taking the program serious. And what transitions throughout the process is you start to benefit all of these other beautiful blessings that are given to you, seeing the mistakes in your life, and the time off becomes almost a secondary thought process. So many people that are trying to get into RDAP, the reason why we talk about it so much on the channel and telling people how to qualify is a lot of federal defending attorneys are not well equipped or well versed when it comes to the residential drug addiction program. And in order to qualify for RDAP, you have to be completely forthcoming and honest during what's called your PSR, your pre-sentence interview, which typically takes place after you take your plea deal, or in some cases you go to trial and found guilty. You have a pre-sentence interview with probation. If you do not disclose your substance abuse during that interview with probation, it's going to be almost impossible to get into the program. Now, some people are going to try to manipulate the system. No doubt. They're going to try to say they have alcohol problems or drug problems when they really don't, in order to get some time off. But many people will minimize their substance abuse because their attorney didn't disclose it to them, telling them how important it is to be honest. And many people will minimize it when they speak to probation, thinking, if I'm honest about my drug abuse, it's going to get me in more trouble. The judge is going to give me a harsher sentence. They think it can cause them more harm than good by actually minimizing what types of alcohol or substance abuses they were using. So the point of the channel, and if you've watched our channel long enough, you'll see that we've actually exposed other prison consultants who right now are under federal indictment waiting to be sentenced, who are doing exactly what your viewer thought I was doing. We tell people right out of the gate, if you do not have a substance abuse problem, getting into RDAP is half the battle. They will sniff you out within weeks and you will get kicked out of the program. Just because you get into RDAP does not mean you're going to make it through RDAP. I saw more people either get kicked out, quit the program, drop out of the program. It's so intense that if you don't really have any serious issues that you're dealing with, you're wasting your time and you're taking that seat from somebody else that A, could use the time off, and B, wants to get out of prison and stay out of prison by taking control of their life.
Now, let me ask, the first question we got is from Lewis. He wants to know how many people are in that program at one time. Well, I guess specifically where you were at.
So yeah, obviously that's going to vary prison to prison depending on the size. But where I was at, there's about 150 guys that were in the unit. So if you picture the way Coleman Prison was set up is you have a compound with a minimum, medium, you have from camps, lows, mediums, and penitentiaries. RDAP, where I went, was at the low security, 3,000 inmates at the low. There was 3 different pods. There was A unit, B unit, and C unit, and each one of those unit had 4 dorms. There was only 1 dorm for RDAP, and it was in unit C2. So there were 150 guys in unit C2, and at any given time, there could be 3 or 4 classes going. So if you look at it as you start with a group of guys, like each group had maybe 20 or 30 guys in it, and that was like your freshman group. You all kind of progressed through at the same pace. And then there's other groups ahead of you, which are like your senior peers or your big brothers that are getting ready to graduate. So there's a lot of accountability going back and forth from, obviously, the longer you've been in the program, the more accountable you're being held. Early in the program is when they're expecting you to fuck up and make mistakes and try to steal chicken out of the chow hall, or, try to run games on the COs and try to sneak into other units and bring in cell phones. They expect you to do that early on, but once you get midway through the system, they want to see you start taking the process serious, and they want to see the changes that you're making and how you're going to influence others coming in behind you in order to get through the program. You do not get through that program unscathed. I don't care who you are. If you're having an easy time, you fall into a complacent stage, and you're probably not really giving 100% to the program if you're not feeling stress.
Now, Gary T says 2 questions here. Are the people running the program federal employees or professionals from outside, and what is their training and experience?
Great question. So the RDAP coordinator is a psychologist, and they're not prison. So some correctional officers that are in the BOP will transition into what's called, sorry, I just got a text message. Some of the correctional officers will transition from correctional officers to case managers within RDAP, unit team managers. So they have to qualify for certain licensing, chemical dependency, psychology classes, because it really is, it's a ridiculous psychological battle that goes back and forth. So they don't bring in outside help. It's actually hired within the BOP, but different requirements are needed to be met. And the person that runs it within each prison is an actual prison psychologist that oversees the RDAP unit.
Now, wait, real quick, before you get to that second part, Lewis H mentioned about degrees, and Gary T was, what's their training and experience? So you're saying they need to require a license? How does that come through the federal system, or do they have to go out and pursue it?
No, they do it through, I mean, I'm sure there's some basic schooling you have to have. I believe you have to have, I don't know exactly, so you don't quote me on this, but I know the DTSs, so you have your RDAP coordinator, and then you have the DTSs, which are underneath the RDAP coordinator. DTS is a drug treatment specialist. So they have to be certified in drug treatment, and they also have to have met basic criteria for the same thing that a correctional officer within the Bureau of Prisons would have had to have met. There's ongoing courses that they have to, the material that they go through, the study guides, the manuals that they use. The average DTS that I met, there were some in there that you could tell were just there to collect a paycheck, and they didn't seem like they were involved as much. But you also saw inmates there that were just there to goof off all day. So you saw good and bad on both sides. But I don't know the exact qualifications. I know that it's ran and overseen by an actual psychologist.
Right. So obviously, for those that are getting certed, they can either come in with maybe some form of cert, or they can actually maybe work on it as they progress in their field.
Yes.
That's what Lewis was asking. Hey, you know what's funny is, I got a little side question for myself here. 2 things. I always make sure that inmates, I tell them to always be honest on intake. If they say that, let's say they have drug problems and they really don't, that's going to kick them in the ass later on, or even vice versa. When you're looking for people to go into a drug program and they want it, then you say, well, on intake, you never said you had these concerns. So for the people that you consult, do you stress the importance of honesty? And if they're not qualified, you tell them, don't make up a problem if you don't have it?
Yeah, we tell people when we ask people, do you have any substance abuse issues? And some people will say yes, some people will say no. Some people ask, why are we asking that? And we'll tell them, if you're interested in taking, RDAP, the Residential Drug Abuse Program, if you're interested in getting sentence reduction, you have to have substance abuse issues. And first off, the average person is not qualified to determine whether or not they have substance abuse issues or not. That's why it's extremely important to be completely transparent. If a probation officer that's doing that pre-sentence interview says, do you have drinking issues? And you say to yourself, well, I'm a weekend warrior, but I function daily. I get up and go to work, so I don't have a problem. That doesn't mean that you don't have a problem. That just means you potentially could be a functioning alcoholic just because you're not drinking yourself into a coma and getting behind the wheel. There's different levels of substance abuse. So the best thing you can do is just try not to be a know-it-all when you're talking to probation, and just answer the questions honestly. Do you drink? Yes, I drink on the weekends. How much do you drink? Just tell them honestly. There's no need to mislead. There's no need to overindulge and say you drink more than you do, or at the same time, don't try to minimize it and make it sound like you don't have a problem, because you might shoot yourself in the foot. I believe RDAP should be, I wish the program wasn't just focused on substance abuse, because the program has so many techniques and tools. And because they're dangling that carrot of a year over your head, you'll get people to focus on something that they typically wouldn't focus on, because they might get time off. And like we said earlier on, their initial intent is to get the time off. But what ends up happening is it's going like from a caterpillar to a butterfly. You go through this cocoon phase where you start changing and you don't even realize it until all of a sudden you're talking different, you're thinking different, you're focusing on consequences, you're thinking, what would I do different if I were going to do this over? Even in today's day and age, being in the free world, things that I used to do, driving recklessly or getting road rage, or somebody speeds by you or cuts you off and you want to chase them down just to give them the finger. And next thing you know, you're either getting shot, you're getting in an accident, somebody dies, you're getting arrested. You have to be able to think ahead and say, if I take this action, what kind of consequence could come from it? So RDAP creates and positions all of these tools that they use substance abuse to get you into that program, but the program has next to nothing to really do about substance abuse. It's focusing on making better choices so you don't turn to alcohol and drugs in the future.
Bonnie D says, one of the things that impresses me about RDAP Dan, Federal Prison Time Consulting, is that he emphasizes accountability at all stages of the process, from indictment through being free. And I agree. That's one of the reasons why I also follow your channel. Dan, I was actually, I see a lot of inmates on a daily basis, and I always try to encourage programming. But when they ask for the external reward, I always say it's not about that. So, it's about the fact that you need something, and you're looking for the benefits that are outside of you. So when you finally convince them to take a program, they're like, all right, Gangi, I'll do this for you. It's like, you're not doing it for me. What kind of gets me upset is when you, and this, I think this is a national concern too, is when you get these inmates that wait till the end and realize, oh my God, parole needs me to take this. And now the problem is, you have someone that's coming right from the get-go that wants that program. But the problem is you're going to get that push from parole, because parole needs to get this person out. So my thing is for me, I want to give it to that person that wanted that program immediately. The person that came in and just says, listen, this is my third time in prison. I know I'm making some bad choices. I want to take a program because I don't want to come back. As opposed to me having to give it to this person who, oh, you know what, you had 5 years or 10 years in, now you decide you need it. Do you see the difference in those two type of people? Like, do you see the people that are in there for that external incentive, and are they a little bit different than the people who are there for the right reasons, that actually want to change? And at the end, if they continue with that mindset, is the outcome different? Is there a chance that that person is going to wind up making those same bad choices again if they're totally focused on that external incentive?
Yeah. So what happens is you're basically taking two different types of people that are starting from two different entry points, the way you just described it. But what happens is when they get into the middle, they're almost at the same point, because regardless if you're doing it for an external benefit early on, or you're doing it, or you're the guy that's like, go, go, go. I can tell you, the guy that goes in, that's like, go, go, go. I'm going to be a, cheerleader for RDAP. The guy that's too overexcited, he sets the bar so high for himself that now the unit, the RDAP coordinators, everybody's expecting you to maintain that level of intensity. And that's where I really crashed and burned early going into RDAP. I thought I had this figured out. I thought I was going to go in there and manipulate this program to benefit me. So I went in and I tap danced. I told them what they wanted to hear. I was doing the pull-ups. I was decent at speaking. So I would stand up and I'd get a little round of applause. My ego would get stroked. The first time I fucked up, the first time I made a mistake, it put a target on my back. And every inmate was gunning for me. I don't mean like physically, like out to hurt me, but they saw that, they found what my weakness was. My weakness was I was a manipulator. And I actually got identified as a manipulator in RDAP within my first month there. I thought, how can I earn brownie points and make myself look better in front of everybody? So I tried to concoct this elaborate scam to do a pull-up where I pull up my whole group in front of everybody, but telling them I'm going to do it. And my mindset was, if I pull up everybody, everybody's not going to get in trouble. So everybody will absorb the hit. Well, somebody knew that I was planning this because me and my big mouth told somebody. And when it got brought back to the DTSs, and in the morning meeting, when they said, does anybody have any pull-ups? And one of my own teammates raised his hand. I had no idea that it was coming. And he said, I'd like to pull up Mr. Wise. And he went and told the entire what I was doing. It was so embarrassing. But more importantly, that's when I got targeted as a manipulator. So now going forward, anytime I did anything, whether I poor intent, good intent, didn't matter, it was always being construed as, oh, Dan, you're manipulating again. And I could not get away from it. It's like, once you've got those stripes on you, it's very hard to change that color. So I had to work extra hard to find what causes me to make these kind of mistakes. And I see it in almost every one of our clients that we assist going into the prison system, especially when we deal with the white collar guys. The white collar guys usually are wealthy. They're used to running shit. They're used to calling the shots, and they think they can go in and continue to do it throughout the prison system. They think they're going to control the environment. They're going to pay their attorney hundreds of thousands of dollars and get a different outcome than the guy that didn't have any money. Well, if anybody knows anything about the federal system, whether you have an appointed federal attorney or you have a high paid federal attorney, you're going to end up with the same exact outcome 99% of the time, because the guidelines are the guidelines.
I got a few interesting questions coming our way. One is from, oh, by the way, I want to comment on what Gary T said. Gary T is in the correctional field. And check this out. This is how my community is. They're all in agreement with Gary T. Majority of inmates will be released one day, and I want them coming out better men and women. So, I mean, people have this generalized hate. You may have that problem with that one individual, but don't generalize it to the field. And that's something me and you discussed, Dan, multiple times. Like even with me with inmates, if I have a problem with one inmate, it's not every inmate. Same thing as if you have a problem with one officer, it really could be just that officer. That's a bridge we have to find a way to fix. But there's a good question here that comes from W. Viegel. He says, do you have RDAP reps at every federal prison, and do you consider gambling addictions?
No, RDAP is not at every single federal prison. If you come visit our website, federalprisontime.com, if it's not there yet, it'll be there in the next couple of days. We have a list of which prisons offer RDAP. So not every prison in the federal system offers it. And gambling, that's a question we get a lot. Actually, I saw that question come through the room a few lines up. That is a great question. However, no, if your addiction is gambling, now I can tell you this, if you have a gambling addiction, very, very plausible that you also may have a drinking problem. I don't see many people at a casino that aren't drinking alcohol. So if you have a gambling addiction, think deep and hard and really ask yourself, when you're losing, do you find yourself drinking more? And if that's the case, that's a pretty early sign of being an alcoholic. So, but yes, to answer your question, no, gambling does not. However, they do have programs in prison for GA, for Gamblers Anonymous, but it doesn't have sentence reduction.
Lane Ward says RDAP Dan is right on. He knows what he's talking about. I'm sure you appreciate that compliment.
Thank you, Lane.
Lane Ward, Lane Juan.
Lane.
That's he
Lane.
was on my show last week. Lane, give me the okay if it's you. I'm pretty sure it's you. He ran a tribal facility, a Native American ran facility. Amazing information, guys. If you haven't seen it, he was on the show last week. Hey, let me ask you it's a two-part question. It's my own question now, though. But would you say RDAP Dan? I'm sorry, RDAP Dan. Well, would you say that? Sorry, guys. I'm so used to calling him RDAP. Would you say that the RDAP programs promote like abstinence, like zero tolerance to any forms of drug use? And if so, how would they, or what's their perspective on what do you call it, medicated assisted treatment?
So you're talking about people that are on like
Suboxone, methadone.
So, no, they're not against it, because if they are against any illicit drug activity. So even if it's just smoking a daily joint, somebody made the statement in RDAP saying, my drug addiction is not as bad as somebody else's because I only smoke weed. I'm not doing heroin. And wrong thing to say. The whole unit, the whole team, the RDAP coordinators, everybody pounced. Regardless of what they really felt inside, they realized you can't give an inch. You can't give somebody a way to justify what they're doing. Can some people smoke weed and function perfectly fine? Sure. But in RDAP, there is no, you can do this, but not this. Now, if you're prescribed something, the problem is the opioid addiction, specifically Suboxone, that's turned into such a money market that it's the same thing why pain clinics got clinked, because basically doctors found a way to be legalized drug dealers, and people that are on Suboxone and methadone, most of them don't have a plan of action to get off of it. They go to it every day, and if they miss a day or they run out of money, they're doing unscrupulous things legitimately. I lived in South Florida call centers. I knew people that would go out and, prostitute themselves to be able to go get their methadone or their Suboxone strips. We saw Suboxone strips were so commonly being brought into the prison that they had to start changing the way they would accept cards, and some of the correctional officers were smuggling it in because they were getting paid so much more money than what they would make doing almost anything else, that that evil dollar bill can really take a hold of somebody. And I don't believe any of these correctional officers were bad or corrupt. I believe a lot of them fell into hard times and they thought, I'm going to do this once and I'm never going to do it again. And once turns into twice turns into, and then before you know it, you don't even feel like you're breaking the law anymore. That's like most of my clients. Most of my clients are not bad people. They got caught up in something that they didn't mean to do necessarily. They turned a blind eye, and then it became the norm. And it's the same thing. So prescription pills, it's a gray area, because I don't know that many people that are getting prescribed oxycodone or Percocets that actually need them. I believe that physical and mental addiction becomes overpowering to the point where you're flat out addicted more than you're trying to cover up the pain.
You made a good point with the manipulation aspect. I actually, that's one of my expertise. And one of the factors, or one of the things that we discuss, is scarcity, where you can have an officer, let's say, has a perfect career, and in the last year or change, they do something foolish, and people will be like, oh my God, I can't believe he did something foolish. What was he thinking 24 years in? But sometimes people's life changes. Like maybe the person can go into a divorce or something like that, and there's an emergent need for something, and the inmates get wind of it, and out of desperation, that officer jumps on that because they feel that there's no other way out. But again, it's not to minimize what they've done, but it's for us to get an understanding that manipulation can happen to anyone. It really is based on the situation. So I thought that was a great example of how someone that may never had a history with something all of a sudden gets hit with something major in their life, and that makes them change their perspective on I'll just do it once just to get out of it. And it really is about the situation that we create ourselves or gets created by whatever happens, especially like divorces. A couple good questions is coming from Bonnie. So I want to ask one, but real quick, the one thing about medical assisted treatment, I had Connie on my show a while back, is that even though it's a collective effort for mental health, medical, and we'd like to say custody be involved in that, they should be involved because they're involved with that distribution. The concern I always have is twofold. One is I don't ever see an end date, like you mentioned. It's like they get on it, but there's no effort for an end date. And that seems to be a national concern we were discussing. And also, you have inmates that are in prison that, been in prison for years that they're putting on it. So it's like, okay, well, if they're going through the withdrawal, that should have happened in the jails, in the counties. Now you're in prison for 5 or 10 years, and you have an inmate now on Suboxone. It kind of confuses me because they've been going through that already. That should have been long gone years ago. So we're introducing them to something that I feel it just doesn't make any sense to me. But again, I'm not the expert on that. I just, just see it happening and I ask questions. Bonnie asked, where is she? Where are you, Bonnie? Bonnie, where are you? Bonnie goes, I'm curious. What's the recidivism rate for those who graduate RDAP, and what percentage of people wash out?
So recidivism on RDAP is the odds are much greater for somebody that's actually gone through RDAP. Now it depends where you take it to. There are some units, some RDAP facilities that are very laxed, overly lax, to the point where you can get away with just about anything because the RDAP coordinators aren't taking it serious, where other RDAP coordinators take it very serious. Where I was, Coleman, individuals that graduated RDAP, only about 3% were returning back into prison within 5 years. That's really kind of the time you're looking at, is if somebody lasts 5 years once they're out of prison, because a lot of times you got to think about it. Somebody gets out of prison, especially federal prison, you might be on probation for 3 to 5 years, and you're really watching your P's and Q's. But the question is what are these individuals doing when no one's looking anymore, when they're off of probation, when they're off of all restrictions? So when you get somebody 5 years out, if they're still maintaining, and you look at the stats versus somebody that went through the program versus somebody that didn't go through the program, you see that revolving door. I don't remember the exact numbers, but with somebody that didn't go through a program like RDAP or cognitive behavior therapy program, those numbers are staggeringly high of individuals that are coming back in. 40, 50% are coming back in, where 2 to 3% are coming back in that graduate RDAP. So there's 100% proof that the concept of the program works. And RDAP doesn't just exist in the federal prison. It does under that name, the Residential Drug Abuse or Addiction Program, but other states and counties have very similar inmate ran accountability, because really RDAP is ran by inmates. Yes, it's oversaw by staff members, but it's a community therapy program where you are holding each other accountable. I mean, you're literally doing the opposite of what prison teaches us going into prison. Snitches get stitches. You're literally obligated to tell on each other if you see your peer doing something wrong. Using a cell phone, got to tell on you. And the problem is if I don't tell on you and somebody else does, and staff finds out I was there and I didn't raise my hand to tell on you, I get in more trouble for not holding you accountable than you get for the infraction that you caused. So it's a very stressful program.
And you mentioned something that's key before, where, because Bonnie's mentioned something about shakedowns. I want to mention something. When you have these programs that look to help addicts get through the addiction and kind of battle it through, there could be a good potential for a lot of contraband coming into those units, at least at first. And I always tell Cussy, you have to be on your game with that, because obviously if they're all in that one area, contraband could increase. Did you, Bonnie, kind of running with Bonnie's question here, did you get a lot of shakedowns in the RDAP program? And if so, if an inmate was caught with something, let's say drugs or whatnot, does that remove them immediately from the program out? And what about their chances of coming back?
If you get caught with drugs in RDAP, you're boom, you're out of the program. After 90 days, you can reapply. But you get guys that are remember, it's a 10-month program. You get guys that are 8-9 months into the program and get hit for something like that. Drugs or fighting, breaking confidentiality is somebody tells you something in group about, something close to them, even if you didn't have ill intent. For example, maybe I said in group, my daughter died when I was 25 years old. That didn't happen. Just giving you an example. And I shared that in group, and somebody's out in the compound that was in that group. And they're like, man, I can't imagine what Dan must be going through in prison, having a daughter that died while he was in prison. He didn't have any ill intent, but because he shared something that was shared in group, if that gets back to the staff, he's removed from the program immediately, and he'd have to wait 90 days to re-enter in the program. Now, if you get removed from the program from violence, there is no re-entering back into the program. So we saw a lot of shakedowns, and forget about drugs. You get caught with a fucking sugar packet in your locker in RDAP. And so if you think of the prison rules, everyone thinks the rules are so much harder in RDAP. They're the exact same rules that the rest of the prison system follows. The difference is as you know, Anthony, there were certain things, like if you saw a guy and he had, a sugar packet in his pocket, you're maybe not going to bust his balls. But in RDAP, you're held to a higher standard. So even though you're following the same rules, you get caught with sugar packets in RDAP and you get caught more than once, you might get kicked out of the program for that.
As you said, it's more about helping that individual create some order.
Yep.
What's funny is I used to kind of, well, on a state level, we can't promote into those counselor positions. That would be a whole nother job on the outside. So it's a little bit different than the federal system, but we used to provide safety and security. And one of the things I had a concern with was having the inmates yell at the other inmates. When I first got into that, I saw that. I didn't know what I was watching. And I remember there was a thing in Texas called building tenders, where there was a rule that no inmates could ever tell another inmate what to do. But having said that, how it's complemented here is it's all still facilitated through, in our case here, like let's say a civilian facilitator. So technically it is inmate ran, but it is facilitated with someone that's qualified to do it, if you will. So there is someone overseeing it. But again, it's a great partnership between the support from the peers as well as the person that facilitates. I mean, I love inmate mentoring programs. I think that when you have inmates that come in that have a million excuses of why they can't do it, we're very limited as staff to try to motivate them. But then when you get another inmate that comes up that can really relate to this individual, they can put that individual into this program because the inmate won't be able to have an excuse to that individual. For me, they'll give me 20 million excuses why it won't work. But then if a lifer approaches them, they're going to try that excuse with the lifer. And the lifer's like, really? Like I'm doing 20 years, I'm doing life and you got 5 years. So wake up. And I like that partnership. I think that partnership also does very good for the morale of the facility. And people don't realize, I've seen a lot of custody get involved in that, where custody motivates also the individuals to take some programs. Sometimes you'll have custody with an inmate having a one-on-one, and then custody, who's very aware of their surroundings, may say, hey, you know what? Have you spoken to social services about this? Or we have a drug program in our unit. Have you taken it? So I always tell custody, be aware of your surroundings. And during those interactions, your word has tremendous value. So there's a chance you can interact with someone and give them some advice, or maybe tell someone from the other department saying, hey, have you spoke to this inmate? That partnership really goes a long way between that inmate's chance to kind of find what fits for them and then motivate them never to come back into the system. Gary even mentioned before, I thought it was great what Gary said. He goes, the life skills that need to be developed and reinforced before release, hard to go back to the same environment and not go back to old habits. Now, you guys, what I like, in my opinion, what I like about NA and AA is that they do promote like a zero abstinence, yes, but they want people to kind of be tempted so they can fight against the temptation. Where I feel that the medication assisted treatment it doesn't do that. It eases it, but then when they don't have it, the temptation's real. So I feel that you have to kind of expose people to the temptation and let them know that, or let them get the feeling that this isn't for me. My mother was an alcoholic. My mother was a drinker and she was a smoker. And about 20 something years ago, now mind you, my mother's in her 70s now, 75. She's been smoking since she was 15 or 16 years old, and she started drinking probably as soon as she hit 21, and she did that throughout her life until her late 50s and early 60s. Once the doctor told her, you have to quit because this is going to kill you, she cold turkeyed everything and never had a taste for it again. She's around people that smoke, she's around people that drink, but she's not tempted by it. That's just the mindset that she had. Again, over 50 something years maybe of those bad vice habits. And she was able just to clear her mind. And I'm thinking, like, if my mom could do it, who's very simple in her ways, I believe that if anybody puts their mind to it, they can avoid that temptation. Would you agree with that, Dan?
I would. And I wanted to just comment on something. I think it was Lewis. So what was the one thing Dan remembers from prison that keeps him out doing right? Actually, this bracelet that I'm wearing is the actual bracelet that they gave me when I graduated to phase 3 in RDAP. So I wear it as a daily reminder of what I had to put myself through to get where I am, because trust me, just like anything, you go to the gym, you feel great, you diet, you feel great, you start eating like shit, you start looking like shit. If I stop practicing what I say, before you know it, I'm taking shortcuts and I'm right back where I was. So great question. But to answer your question, the problem that most people don't address with drug addiction or whatever it is you're right. They try to medicate the problem, and that's fine to create a crutch. But what steps are you taking to actually improve who you are? And that comes through communication. The average person, and we used to have to do drills in RDAP. We'd actually have to do mock-up versions of this, and it felt so real. Where, for an example, you get out of prison, you go back to your old neighborhood, good, bad, whatever it is, and your friends, who your so-called friends, they know you're out of prison. They don't really care if you go back. They're just doing the same shit they're always doing. And the first thing they say is, "Hey, Dan, I see you don't have a license. I see you're walking to the bus. Let me give you a ride. It's raining. Come on, man, hop in the car. You don't need to walk." Deep down inside, you know, I shouldn't be getting in that car. He's carrying a gun. He's smoking weed. He's doing whatever. I'm on probation. I'm on supervised release, but I don't know how to say no. I don't know how to be direct and assertive. Instead, you become passive aggressive, or you become adverse, where you become angry. If you can't learn how to be assertive, if you can't learn to say no to somebody, it comes back to the basic bullshit you learned in school. Just say no. And it's really that simple. You have to get comfortable with doing with what's uncomfortable. And that's why they say anything, process change is a process. It's not an immediate event. I can tell you exactly what you need to do to have the perfect life, but until you start practicing it and creating new habits, it doesn't mean shit to you until you apply it in the real world. So RDAP installs this over 10 months in the workshops they do. We would create mock scenarios, and you're driving down the street, and what are you going to do if your mother, what are you going to do if your mother's smoking weed at the house? Are you going to call the cops on her? Most people say, no, I'm not telling on my family. Never. Well, when they come and your mom gets a little violation for weed, and you get a violation for, you're out on parole or you're out on pretrial release, the consequences are so severe that if you can't learn to identify healthy relationships versus unhealthy relationships and cut the bad people out of your life, regardless whether they're family, friends, blood, water, all that shit, it doesn't matter. A blood relative that is willing to put you at risk is a unhealthy relationship. Doesn't mean you don't love that person, but it means you're not willing to risk your freedom, because how are you supposed to be able to help anybody else if you can't help yourself first? You are completely useless to everybody if you're allowing yourself to be put into a situation to where something negative could come from it, because in the end, when the shit goes down, you only have yourself to blame. You can't then get mad at your mom because she's got weed. You can't get mad at your friend because he had drugs in the car. You got into the car because you were too much of a simple-minded, weak person to own up and say what you need to say. Instead, you're going to get in that car and you're going to be riddled with anxiety until you get out of the car. Until they start implementing programs and techniques to help you come to terms with that channel of thought, coexisting with some sort of maybe a light dose of a drug to kind of help you get through it, it's insanity. It's watching somebody do the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. Shit will never change. And there's so much money in big pharma, and there's no money in getting people to make better choices, that it's super lopsided.
Bonnie, of course, says classic RDAP Dan answer. So but it's great. We just did a show not too long ago about an officer who's new to the job, but his wife is still dealing with addiction. So everybody said that, have you shared your goals with your wife, and have you discussed it? And yes, he has. And the fact that she's not willing to change. And everybody just said exactly what you said. As tough it is, it's like you're going to have to cut her out. You're not going to have a choice, because eventually she's going to wind up bringing you down. But again, it was about discussing the goals, making sure they're on the same page, but very similar to what you discussed. I don't know if you guys got a chance to see that, but if you do get a chance, the gentleman wrote me an article. I wrote a letter through the email. You should check it out. It's a few episodes back, but right on point with what Dan said here, and the response from the community was phenomenal. Again, same response that Dan just gave is what the community gave. I want to do a little sidebar real quick about staying awake. Thorfinn Gaiman, he's been getting hit up with some doubles. So a little sidebar because he watches our channel all the time, and then I want to get back to the topic because we have a few more questions for Dan. But if you get caught on that second or third double, you don't want to be positioned in a spot where you sit. So you want to keep yourself moving. If there's general assignment areas that you could do, but I don't think you want a unit. You want to stay away from that chair. You want to keep yourself motivated, and also document how many times that you've been mandated. When the person comes up to you, like the supervisor says, are you okay to work another shift? And even before they mandate you, you should tell them no. Don't volunteer for the yes. And they force you anyway, you should do a report automatically that says, be advised, I did turn this down, but I was forced to work after working so many doubles. So God forbid that you do fall asleep, hypothetically, which I know that won't happen. There's some liability on the department because remember, of course, when you're short with numbers, they're looking for quantity over quality. So I want you to document it, and I want you to make sure that they know that you said no. Document that no, that you did not volunteer. That is key. Okay, but keep yourself busy and keep yourself active. Hey, Correctional Officer Training Academy says, is there a spiritual component involved in the program?
Oh, for me?
Yeah.
No. It's very non-religious. I would say the spiritual part is there is a vibe of it, but they really discourage anybody from talking about religion in the program just because there's so many different religions. The BOP is terrified of offending somebody when it comes to offending somebody's religion and potential lawsuits. Same thing when you see like transgender individuals come in. We had a transgender individual come in that we were all told before, we were forced to call her she. Before she arrived at the prison, there was in RDAP, before she arrived into RDAP, the RDAP coordinator pulled all 150 of us into a room and said, we have an inmate coming next week. If I catch anybody referring to Miss Lampley as him, he, anything with the male, you can refer to as inmate Lampley, but we were prohibited from saying man. And they same thing with religion. If you try to push religion, you can talk about religion like amongst yourselves, but not in the group settings. It's not like AA. It's not based on like a big book theory. I would say AA only works for somebody that wants it to work. RDAP, because you're getting that year off, it can change somebody that didn't want to benefit. Like I didn't want any of the benefits. I thought there was absolutely nothing wrong with me, that I shouldn't be in prison. I was a victim. I only went to prison because somebody told on me. I didn't want to look at myself in the mirror and admit that I was my own worst enemy. If I would have just done an AA class or an NA class, I would have sat through the class and told them what they wanted to hear, because you're not forced to share. You're not forced to say anything. It's a very relaxed environment. They have AA and NA there that is based on the big book. But it was the aggressiveness behind it didn't exist.
Now,
if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense. It makes a lot of sense. A lot of people are talking about the partnership between staff and the program. Now, guys, there are going to be some state level programs that are run a little bit differently, because it's not going to be ran by anybody that represents custody staff. It may be ran by counselors, program providers, even an outside vendor. But do you see real, genuine support from staff in regards to what the program provides?
Staff within RDAP, yes. Staff outside of RDAP, like your regular unit correctional officers throughout the prison, not so much. Some of them kind of just mind their own business. Other staff member, because you had to wear a bracelet like this, and it's not hanging up over there, a lanyard you had to wear, so you stuck out like a sore thumb. If you were walking the compound and you were late somewhere, and one of the regular staff members saw that you were an RDAPper, boy, they pluck you out and bring you back to the RDAP unit, and they'd go up to Mrs. Smith, who was the RDAP coordinator. And I mean, just kind of almost busting your balls because you're in RDAP. And it happened to me once or twice, and I got it. But I also understood that they don't understand RDAP because they're not in it. They think it's just some bullshit program where everybody has to tell on each other, and it's creating a bunch of crybabies and tattletales, because that can be the outside view in. That is the common gossip is, oh, everybody in there is either crying about somebody or telling on somebody or snitching on somebody. And the reality is yes, if that's how you want to label it. But when you sign up for that program, you are signing a piece of paper saying, I agree and volunteer to hold others accountable, give and receive feedback, and allow myself to be held accountable. So you're volunteering for this. It's really grueling. I mean, I can't tell you how many nights that I would chew my fingers off practically and think that I'm getting kicked out of the program tomorrow. I was fortunate enough to have the brains to write a letter every single day I was in prison. So every day I was in prison, I wrote a letter and I would send it home. So I would write letters from Monday to Sunday. Sunday night, I put them all in an envelope and send them. 3 or 4 of those letters a week would be addressed to Dear Future Dan, because I knew how crazy I felt and how out of control that I felt. And I knew how much it meant to me to finish this program. And I knew how much it meant for my kids and all the bullshit that I put them through throughout their entire childhood because I was just fucking idiot. So whenever I would come into this intense stress where I just wanted to do what I would usually do and run and blame other people, I would write myself a letter because I knew there'd be a point in my life where I'm out here now where I would want to find a shortcut. And I go through these letters and I read, Dan, if you're having these thoughts and you're doing this, remember what you're doing right now. You're sitting in a bunk. You're surrounded by men that are farting and burping. You're surrounded by correctional officers who are there to do a job. Maybe they like you, maybe they don't, but you are not home. And as much as you say you did all of this bullshit in your past to help your kids, you're doing them absolutely no good right now by being in prison. So whatever you're thinking, stop fucking thinking it and get back on the fucking horse and do what you got to do. So you have to find ways to battle and push through. And there's always going to be haters. There's always going to be people out there that are going to try to knock you down. And that's okay, because if you can take it once, you can take it twice. And before you know it, you grow such thick skin and you learn how to be vulnerable so you can still love and appreciate all of the beautiful thing that life has to offer. I don't believe institutionalized is a real thing unless you create an institutionalized environment in your mind when you're in prison. I chose to never feel like I was in prison. I smiled every day. I took pictures. I surrounded myself around with positive, like-minded individuals. If somebody was on some kind of negative bullshit and they wanted to talk about, oh, the food sucks, all the staff sucks, the yard's always locked down. It's like, can't you focus on anything positive? Can't you focus on we had so many awesome classes. We were able to get in shape. The food wasn't that bad. There was plenty of times where I was laughing my ass off in prison, having some of the best experiences of my life. So you can choose to make the worst of the worst. You can choose to make the best of a bad situation, or you can choose to just focus on the negative, which is just going to create a complete negative environment in prison and out of prison. So I apologize there.
No, but Dan, just to compliment that, Dan, you made a real sincere change. You could see it. And I think that's why you have such an impact on the people that you work with. And even I think also for the profession as well. I mean, to go on a show like this and to give us an understanding of your perspective and to have an audience like this who sees it. I mean, change is only real if you believe it's real. So obviously we see the passion, but we also see the motivation. I mean, the motivation was your daughter who waited for you to come home every day, and I think the key here is that when you got home, you were there for her, we're more than our choices that we make. I learned to believe that because I have to believe in programming because I believe in the people that do it. So with that said, I believe that we're more than the one choice that we make. And I believe that we can have an influence. I believe that you do it through your channel every day. And I also believe that even with us connecting, this could have a bigger influence. So I'm glad you had that feeling just now. I'm glad because it shows the sincerity. You can't fake that, and I think sometimes we need to see that, because sometimes I think even us in corrections, sometimes we get disenfranchised because we may be so frustrated with one individual that we cannot get to, that we generalize it out as, nobody can change. But then we have someone like you that comes on, you show the sincerity, you show what motivates you. And I think that brings life back to us, because we need more of you. We need more Dans in this world who believe they can do it. And I'll tell you something, sometimes custody or sometimes staff, we get frustrated when people just want to resist and everybody's blaming the system for failing. And it's like, it's not the system sometimes. Sometimes you just can't get to everyone. So the thing that's good about you is you're actually a great example of the system working, and that's what people need to see. People need to see that someone like you made a difference and is very successful right now. And it's not even about making the money. It's about impacting other people. And that all comes from the fact that you needed something, and now karma says, I want to give something back. So bravo, Dan. I think that's amazing what you do. I think my audience would agree. And just bravo. And on a side note, since we brought up family, when you got back home, how old was your daughter when you got locked up?
So 2 daughters. So 2014, I'm terrible with ages here. 2014 is when I left. So was that 5 years ago? Actually, 5 years ago. It's funny. 5 years ago today was my self-surrender date, Anthony. I don't know if I told you that or not, but this is my weird 5-year anniversary. So 19, 18, 17, 16, 15, 14. So my oldest daughter was 14, 17, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12. And my youngest daughter was 12. So 12 and 14 when I went into prison.
All right, so let me ask you a question. Did they understand why you were going? Did you sit down and tell them?
Oh, sure. They understood, because I lied to their faces, and I told them the government was out to get me, that I didn't do anything wrong, but because I don't have millions of dollars, I created this false sense of they can't trust any type of an authority figure, where they started rebelling in school and talking back to their mother. So yeah, I told them why I was going. It just wasn't the truth at all. It was a flat out fucking lie.
And let me ask you a question. When you got home, well, when did you start telling them the truth?
When I got into RDAP.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Well, so I was in prison. We would talk and email, weekly. So I started telling them there. And then actually my daughter came on my channel, my younger daughter, Lauren. She came on the channel and talked about what it was like for her when she found out that I lied, and it was very hard to hear.
Yeah, because obviously it also paints a different perspective of her when you have to, tell her the truth. Someone asked another question. We'll break away from family now, but thank you for being so brutally honest. We have a lot of officers that deal with addiction, and Sarah Johnson asked a great question just now. Just joined, but what do you recommend to help me understand addiction?
To understand addiction is almost like you have to realize that there's the way you comprehend things is not right. Doesn't mean it's wrong. It's only right for you. When you see an addict and you say, if you don't want to use drugs, just don't. And even you said it earlier. You said, if my mother could quit, anybody could quit. And I might be a little debatable on that, because I've seen some people that take sex offenders. Here's a hot topic that nobody likes to talk about. I'm probably one of the only prison consultant that works with some sex offenders, specifically child pornography cases. And the reason why I decided to work with them is being in a low security, where I was at, low security federal prison, there's 3,000 inmates in there, and probably 30 to 40% of them were sex offenders for child pornography cases. And of course, in there, I never experienced that before. So in there, I had the same view that any average person would have, that, they're the lowest of the low, they're cockroaches, they don't deserve the air that we're breathing. All of these thoughts, I had the same thoughts. When I got out of prison and started doing what I do now as consulting, I started getting calls from time to time from these guys. And at first they wouldn't tell me what their crime was. And when somebody won't tell you what their crime is, in my world, that means you're probably a sex offender, because you don't want to talk about it. but they all had one common thing that really kind of shocked me. Every single one of them would tell me that when they would do what they would do, when they would download the child pornography and do whatever it is they do, they would immediately feel an enormous amount of regret and hatred for themselves and disgust, and they would delete it and tell themselves they're never doing it again. The same thing I would hear an addict say. And then that urge would resurface. There's nobody for them to really go to. Your average sex offender cannot go to a local therapist and say, hey, I have a problem with downloading child pornography, because now that therapist or psychologist or whoever they're talking to is obligated to report this to authorities. So just like how you said before, or somebody in your room said it, Anthony, they said, most of these guys that go to prison, they're going to get out of prison at some point. And we don't want them to keep committing the same crimes. We don't want them to keep putting our families at risk. Well, sex offenders, if we just talked horrible about them and say they're the worst of the worst, knowing they're going to get back out of prison sooner or later, if we're not creating some kind of a channel, not a channel, but a channel for them to direct their focus to help them make changes and help them get the help that they need, next time it's going to be your child, it's going to be my child. So we're either part of the problem or part of the solution. You can't pick and choose what crimes are acceptable versus what's not acceptable. And the same thing for addiction. Addiction is it's untamable. It's something that is so disconnected from our understanding. I've never had an addictive personality. I could go smoke crack tomorrow and never smoke it again. I could go stick a needle in my arm tomorrow and never do it again. I know that about myself, but I know other people that just the look of something or the smell or being out past a certain time or something triggers, and before you know it, they're just off to the races. So I think the first thing to understand is realize that it's something that you don't understand, and you have to appreciate that it's so far beyond our understanding that the best thing you can do is be supportive and be there when they're looking for help, and maybe feed them with, have you tried this? And Googling. I mean, you have to be supportive to somebody. You can't tell them just quit, because it doesn't work that way.
Well, it's great to know, because obviously we have a lot of programs that gear towards those who are sex offenders. We try to correct their way of thinking, and then ultimately try to build them with a better foundation. But like you said, most do regret. But with that said, we in society, we still don't minimize that. You know, that's a horrible offense. But I love how you were able to relate both worlds. And I think my audience was able to understand that. Like, I know what you're saying. It's the addiction. And we obviously, if they're getting released, we have to find a way to battle them through that. And that's a perspective I have a feeling that we're interested in, but a lot of people don't realize that we are. You know what's funny? I tell the people that work in corrections right now, because I know we'll start coming to a close soon. I tell a lot of people that work in corrections right now that we know where everything is shifting now. Now it's a lot of it's geared towards rehabilitation, but safety and security has to be a part of that. You can't minimize the fact that safety and security is what's going to help facilitate these programs, because we can't deny the fact that it's needed. But in your experience, dealing with rehabilitation side of things, and also dealing with, the safety and security side, being an inmate, being locked up, and seeing the importance of both roles, the importance with the rehabilitative side, the importance with the safety and security. Do you think that rehabilitation could exist without that component, without that safety and security component?
No, without the safety and security component, there's nothing to hold them accountable. You can't just create a program and say, hey, here's a program. If you want help, come get help. And whatever happens. That's the reason why sex offenders will go to a low security versus a camp, because they're a security risk to society. So the threat to society is very real. And again, it's not to minimize what they've done at all. It's just not to bastardize them and ostracize off the grid. It's to say, hey, look, you're really, really, really effed up. You've done something that is going to be really hard to come back from. And when you come clean and you tell your friends and family about what you did, you can't tell them with the expectation of they're going to forgive you. You have to tell them and come clean with it to forgive yourself. What they're going to do, you can't control that. They might tell you to go fly a kite, never call me again. And you have to respect that. You can't get mad at them because they don't want to understand. I'm not forced to understand what it is you're going through. It's not my responsibility to give two shits about what you're going through. Now, if I choose to want to care, that's on me. And just like when you're atoning for your sins, saying sorry for the crimes you committed, I took money from you and I want to pay you back. You know, you don't have to forgive me, and I can't get upset if you don't. I have to forgive myself. And the only way you can do that is by becoming vulnerable and opening up and sharing. It's why we try to bring a lot of our clients on our channel to talk about what they did, talk about their crime, talk about the people they've hurt. It's not so the judge will see it and give them a shorter sentence. It's because if you really want to change and you really want to make a difference, people always ask me, do you think if I do community service, it will help me get a shorter sentence? Maybe, but there's a big difference in doing community service where you go to the Goodwill and you're sitting there donating your time and nobody knows why you're there, versus donating your time at like a high school or a college and talking to a group of people about the mistakes that you made and how you wish you hadn't made these mistakes. And here's the consequences you're now going to pay, because it's practicing such a level of humility. You're embarrassed, you're ashamed. And once you embrace that, you can now move past it because the skeletons are out of the closet. You're no longer hiding something from everybody. And it's the best feeling in the world when you release that weight.
Well, I think that would be when you were in RDAP and you realized that you wanted to tell the truth to your daughter after you did it. I know you probably went through some type of, maybe, I don't know, maybe you felt that your daughter felt a certain way about you revealing the truth, but you must have felt great when you finally got it out there. I'm assuming, right?
I felt amazing. And my kids aren't dumb. Most kids aren't dumb. My kids knew there was more to the story, but they didn't know how to bring it up. So it was always like, what did you do to go to prison again? It was like these questions with these like eyes behind it. And it's like, yeah, you're trying to tell this lie and you don't have anything to really say because it's a lie. So it's like, okay, here's what really happened. And it's like, you know, you feel great after. They get a little upset and they're like, you're no longer Superman. You're no longer invincible. Right. You've become a human being in front of your children's eyes.
And I'll tell you something, it's got to be an amazing feeling. Rachel said something real good, and I have one last question for you. But Rachel had one statement I wanted to see if I can get a comment from you on. Rachel said, punishment is the incarceration. The rehabilitation is the restraining of the mind in an attempt to not reoffend to make the public safer. I mean, you agree with that, right?
I do. Punishment is the incarceration. The real punishment for nonviolent offenders specifically, because there's a difference. And what I mean by difference is there's a period of time before you go to prison. That is also part of the consequence. The not knowing what's next, what prison's going to be like, how to tell your friends and family, months and months and months. Are you looking at 6 months? Are you looking at 6 years? Prison for me was the easy part. That was the true consequence. The after effect 100% is what you choose to do with that time is what is going to define who you are. Prison is not going to define you. Your choices are going to define you.
Well said. I got one last question. A while ago, I did a video where I had a bunch of correctional experts and they gave advice to inmates first coming into the system of what they expect from the inmate. Now, since you've earned the respect from our officers, and we have officers that are always looking to better themselves, always looking to understand that other perspective, at least what I have in the room here. What advice would you give to officers on how to deal with, maybe someone that's in a drug treatment program inside a prison, or just maybe just general population? Like, what advice would you give them?
It's funny because my fellow inmates are not going to like me for this answer, because we actually work with a lot of correctional officers that are getting ready to go into the prison system. And a lot of them, it's for some bullshit that they got caught up in. If you're a correctional officer, you are not going to get anywhere by allowing yourself to befriend an inmate. Even if we used to have a guard that he would let us turn the lights off in the movie room. No harm, no foul, turn the lights off in the movie room. Something went on and a fight broke out. And it came to find out that correctional officer allowed, and of course, that all fell on the correctional officer. My advice to correctional officers are keep the line in the sand. I'm not saying you got to be a dick or you got to go out of your way to, like, when you're doing shakedowns, you don't need to turn the locker upside down. But you do need to maintain a level of order, and you need to maintain that I'm here to do a job. I'm not here to be your friend. I'll give you respect. You give me respect. We can, good game on whatever NFL team lost last night, but don't ask me for any favors. If an inmate's asking you for a favor and you agree to do it once, it's like when you give, I don't know, a stray animal or a cat some fucking milk it's going to be there every single day. And now you're going to have to find a way to say no when you said yes. And what probably is going to happen when you do go to say no, you might be in a bit of a blackmail situation. So you really need to and you usually see this with the new guys, the guys that have been there a while, they usually aren't on that time. My advice for correctional officers are just be respectful of the inmate. And unless, you got to do what you got to do if they're being disrespectful to you, but don't give them an inch because they're con men. We are con men. We go into prison for a reason. We didn't go there because we're good people. We went there because we found a way to cheat the system. And if we think we can get over on you and you're going to turn off the lights for us and you're going to, let us stay up late and you're going to slide us a pizza here and there, eventually it's going to come back to bite you in the ass and you're probably going to lose your job or possibly catch a charge.
Yeah, I always tell people the universal precaution. You always have to be prepared because there's a wolf amongst the sheep. And if you're not prepared for it, you're going to get eaten up alive, especially in the prison system where they're pros and you're not going to out-con a con. Guys, that's great advice. I mean, if they're going to play a game, don't play it with them because you will lose that game. You just have to make it known that they're playing a game and nip it before that game even starts. And I like what Gary says, be firm, fair, and consistent. Now, any final remarks for the audience, Dan?
No, I really had a fun time with this. I've been wanting to get together with you for, a couple of years now. You and I have been bouncing ideas off of each other. So I really wanted to take this opportunity to say thank you. It means a lot. I know you're very selective of the type of content you allow on your channel because of how much riffraff there is out there. So I do really, really appreciate that. And of course, shameless plug, come visit my YouTube channel, RDAP Dan. Also, if you want to come check out our content on our website, federalprisontime.com, we're on all kinds of social media. My sign off is people helping people, communities method, one day at a time.
Yeah, I'll tell you something. I really enjoyed it. I would love for you maybe to contribute more to my channel. I'll let you know every week what we have going on. I think your perspective is phenomenal, very balanced, very fair. I think my audience loves you because the fact that you are very balanced and very fair. Guys, if you do have a chance, the reason why I do recommend this channel, it's very informative, but also you get to hear the stories of a lot of the other individuals who may be going through the system. And in the process, when they're telling them stories, you actually hear a little bit about the legal stuff that we may not be aware of. And I find that to be very interesting. Again, I watch every one of your shows. I don't think I've missed any. I date back to the one that you did right before you went to prison that went into the hundreds of thousands of views or maybe even a million. I don't know how high that one was.
Not millions, hundreds of thousands. I mean, that was a bullshit video too. It's one of those algorithms that just took off and I don't know why.
Yeah, but you never know what's going to take off. But again, Dan, it was great having you on. Again, we'll set up something for the near future. And as always, guys, thank you guys for participating. We couldn't do a show like this without you. But this is the first attempt for that middle ground, and that's the key. And I'm telling you something, guys, the more we have dialogue like this, the more we start bringing respect for the profession. And at that point, we'll start seeing the balance between safety and security and rehabilitation, which leaves no party out. That's the key. As always, guys, stay safe. Love you guys. And Wednesday, I'll upload another video. Friday, Russ will upload his or vice versa. Either way, there'll be one more video up Wednesday and Friday, regular, consistent schedule. And tune in next week because we'll have another live Q&A. And I may have a good guest on with me. I'm working on it right now, and I think you guys will love this chat. As always, guys, stay safe. Love you. All right, hold on. Let me just sign out. And